Week 17 of the fantasy football season, and here's a crucial week here of championship week. There's a few defense DST units I looked at this week. The first one, Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars, the last few weeks, this defense I know has been giving up a lot of points, but they've been putting up points as well for fantasy teams. So the last few weeks for them, week 14 at Tennessee, 22 points allowed, 4 sacks and 3 fumble recoveries. Week 15 versus the Cowboys, 34 points allowed though, 3 sacks in that one. A pick 6 to end it, 2 interceptions. And week 16 at the New York Jets, they shut them down, 19-3, winning that game. 3 points allowed, 3 sacks, and a fumble recovery. So week 17, a good matchup on paper. Indoor game to Houston that gives up the third most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. And right here, Jacksonville available in tons of fantasy leagues right now at 83%. And I think they can make a few plays on Davis Mills. I know this Houston Texan team over the last 3 weeks have definitely been playing better football, but this Jacksonville team's hungry, and they're ready to go in this one. And I think they have a good ball game. So they're in there this week. The next defense is the Washington Commanders. So the Commanders have been a hot and cold type of defense this season here. And obviously last week you weren't going to use them at the San Francisco 49ers. But this week here is a 1-week use only versus a mediocre Cleveland Brown offense, especially over the last few weeks since Watson's been back. I think they can make a few plays. So the last few games for them, not eventful at all. Week 13 at the Giants, 20 points allowed in that one, 4 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 15 versus the Giants, 14 points allowed. And week 16 at the Niners, doors blown off, 37 points allowed, 3 sacks, and in it though. But like I said, week 17, a decent matchup versus Cleveland. Commanders back home in this one. And Taylor Heineke really just put his team in bad position as well on defense for the most part. So the Commanders available right now in 73% of fantasy leagues. The next DSTs, the Seattle Seahawks. So the Seahawks, I know the defense has been bad this season, but it's 1 week only use as well versus the New York Jets coming to town that give up the 10th most fantasy points to defenses on the season here. They're good use, especially if Zach Wilson is going to start in this game with Shriver in this one. I think they'll be decent. If Mike White starts, then I'll take him. A bump back is the Seattle unit. But the last few weeks, they've done nothing. Like I mentioned, week 14 versus the Panthers, 30 points allowed, 2 sacks. Week 15 versus the Niners, 21 points allowed, a sack. And week 16 had a great Chief offense, 24 points allowed. So right here, if it's Zach Wilson starting again, any defense could stop this Jet offense. And I think Seattle could do that, obviously. And they're available right now in 61% of leagues. The next DSTs, the New York Giants. And the Indianapolis Colts are coming in town with Nick Folk most likely starting the quarterback once again this week here. And this Giant defense, they've been a decent unit in terms of bending but don't break it. But in terms of fantasy football, not great. But the Colts do give up the most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So the Giants right now available in 89% of fantasy leagues. So the last few weeks here for the defense, week 14 versus Philly, 48 points allowed, 4 sacks, a block kick. Week 15 at Washington, 12 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries, a touchdown. And week 16 at the Minnesota Vikings, 27 points allowed and 4 sacks. So like I said, 1 week use only. Great matchup versus the Colts, especially if Nick Foles is going to start. We don't know what he's got left in the tank. Giving up the most fantasy points to teams on the year. So they're in there this week in the 5th and final defense DST unit. I look to get off the wires. The Los Angeles Chargers, so another 1 week use only. What a pretty solid matchup here for the Chargers. Obviously, in week 17, Los Angeles Rams that give up the 2nd most fantasy points to defenses on the season, even though I know they blew the doors off the Denver Broncos. There's a few games here for this Charger defense. Week 13 at Vegas, 27 points allowed, an fumble recovery, touchdown, block kick. Week 14 versus Miami, 17 points allowed, 2 sacks. And week 15 versus Tennessee in that one, 14 points allowed, 4 sacks, and So right here, week 16 in Indianapolis, they obviously were recommended Ed. We'll see what they do in that ball game here tonight. And week 17 versus the 2nd most points, the defenses on the unit is the Rams here. And this ball game at home for the Chargers, even though obviously it's pretty much 50-50 split. So right now the Chargers available still in tons of fantasy leagues, surprisingly, in 66% of leagues. And they're in there this week, so that's a few defense DST units I look to add here for week 17 of the championship for most leagues of the fantasy football season.